Natalie Hall lived with her grandmother on the farm for most of her life. Her parents died in an airplane crash on their way to Alaska. A group of geologists were out examining the rough area for valuable deposits. Natalie, who was 5 years old, was given to her grandma Rosemary Hall when her parents died. Rosemary was very old, but she was able to farm on her own, and the people in the area respected her. Rosemary Hall also knew a lot about different herbs and roots, which she used to make strong medicines called decoctions and potions. The love of medicine Natalie grew up with came from her grandmother, which eventually sealed her fate. The girl went to medical school after high school, and afterwards finished her honors. Natalie also learned how to do therapeutic massage and manual treatment at the same time. With pride, Miss Hall would say, "My granddaughter is so smart. She must be like me." It was clear what the old woman said was true, and everyone who knew Natalie agreed with Miss Hall. The young woman tried to find a job, but she couldn't do it. As soon as she saw how much work there was on the farm, she knew she couldn't leave her grandmother alone. "You should know better than to stay here with me. Plan your own journey. Well, mine's almost over," Miss Hall said. Natalie told her, "Come on, Grandma, you're still young." So Natalie's grandma was the first and only person she saw. The caring granddaughter gave Miss Hall shots, rubbed a special cream into her sore lower back, and carefully watched her blood pressure. Natalie often had to go downtown to get her grandmother's medicine because Miss Hall's farm was far from the city center. To be ready in case her grandmother got worse, the young woman made sure she had extra medicine. She met Francis, a young man, on one of those trips. Interestingly, Francis went to the same drugstore as Natalie to get medicine for his grandpa. The teens just so happened to run into each other at the cash register, which made Natalie drop her money. The young man said, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's my fault," and started to pick up the change right away. Natalie blushed deeply and dropped her eyes to hide her shame. After 10 minutes, they had just about bought everything they needed and were laughing out loud at the bench next to the drugstore. It seemed like the teens had known each other for a long time because they talked about everything. Natalie had never met someone so interesting. Francis was smart and well-read. But what was more important was that he wasn't annoying like a lot of the other young guys his age. He didn't say much about himself, but he seemed like he really liked Natalie. Francis was told straight out by the young woman that she grew up on a farm and was raised by her grandma. Natalie never hid the truth because she thought it was the right thing to do. Francis didn't have the guts to tell Natalie that he came from a rich family and was the son of a millionaire, which made Natalie sad. Andre Young, his father, died in a car accident 6 months ago. Also, his grandpa just recently fell off a cliff while climbing a mountain with his group. Richard Young was lucky to be alive, but he had been in a coma ever since. No one knows why Francis didn't tell Natalie any of it. He probably felt bad about being rich and was afraid that Natalie would think of him as one of those rich kids who wasted their parents' money and never did anything on their own. He lied to Natalie, which made him feel bad. But he was ready to put up with it. The young man tried to make up a different story about his life by giving Natalie vague answers. Francis asked Natalie if he could see her again the next day after walking her to the bus stop. The young man was very happy when his new friend agreed. These young people began hanging out with each other more often after that, and Rosemary Hall noticed. "Honey, who are you seeing?" Miss Hall asked. "Please don't try to tell me that you have to go into town every day for work." "That's right, Grandma. I met a guy. He looks like the kind of person I've been looking for a long time," Natalie replied. Rosemary Hall raised her eyebrows in answer. The woman was scared that her granddaughter would make the same mistakes she did. Rosemary never told anyone about her past, but some older people in town knew how crazy Rosemary Hall was when she was younger. The old woman, on the other hand, was always very wary of Natalie's new friend and told her granddaughter to be careful. But Natalie didn't think there was anything wrong with her relationship with Francis. She was sure that everything would be okay between them. The two young people had to be apart for a while for reasons they couldn't change. That was what they had to do because Francis had to deal with issues in the business that his late father owned. The young man didn't tell Natalie any of it though, because that's what his story said. He didn't stick to that reason Instead, he came up with a different one. It just so happened that Andrew Young's wife took over running the business after he died. Francis's real mother was Amanda Young. Amanda's first husband was Andrew. Francis's mom died while giving birth. Andrew's wife had always been stubborn and mean. This made the employees quit, which hurt the business. However, Francis was calm and collected, which is why his subordinates loved and admired him just as much as they did his late father. Francis went to the company's branches to take care of some problems and try to get the profits back to where they were before. At the same time, Natalie was having a very hard time in her life, which was mostly due to Rosemary's rapidly declining health. The woman had terrible chest pains one day and couldn't get out of bed. She laid there for hours. When Natalie called for help, it turned out her grandma was having a heart attack because her heart disease was getting worse. "Your grandma needs surgery, and she needs it as soon as possible," the cardiothoracic surgeon told Natalie. Natalie became scared when she learned how much the surgery would cost. The money was out of reach for the young woman. Even if she sold the farm, the money would not cover a third of the debt. Natalie knew she needed to get a job right away because Rosemary Hall's illness was getting worse quickly. Natalie tried many times to quickly find a job, but none of them worked. The young woman began to lose hope. But then she got help from someone she didn't expect. Francis did something to help his friend while trying to hide the fact that he was rich. Even though the businessman was going to pay half the surgery bill, the young woman insisted that she should pay the other half herself. This made Francis value her even more. That's when the young man had a great thought. Even though Francis's grandpa was released from the hospital, he was still in a coma and needed medical help all the time. It was very hard to find someone to care for Richard, for some reason that no one could explain. Either Francis's stepmother was too hard on the applicants, or they weren't happy with the pay. Either way, Richard Young still didn't have anyone to care for him. Francis didn't tell Natalie that his grandfather was a millionaire, of course. Natalie happily agreed to take care of his grandfather, which made the man very happy. But Amanda Young was unhappy with a new person working in the house once more. "How did you find her? Does she know how to give shots at all?" the woman said in a mean way. Francis would not change his mind though, because he didn't get along with his stepmother. Francis didn't really care what she thought. Francis was sure that Natalie was the right person for his grandpa, because he really thought she was wrong about Natalie. She thought her first day on the job went pretty well, and she didn't think it would be a problem to care for the old man who was in a coma. She had to keep an eye on the patient's health, change his bedding, and make sure he didn't get any pressure sores. There was also tension between the young woman and Amanda Young. "Why does she see me as a threat? What did I do wrong?" she thought to herself. After all, the young woman had a lot of work to do and duties to take care of. During the day, Natalie took care of Richard Young. In the evening, she rushed to the hospital to see her grandma to speed up her treatment. Natalie said yes to Francis's help to help her pay the surgery. At the same time, Richard Young was in a coma. No one knew when or if he had awoken. It was said that he made a mistake that caused him to fall about 100 feet. Even though he was an expected hiker, it was a miracle that he lived through it all. But, as the leader of the probe said, he fell because of a torn rope that looked like it could have been cut with a sharp rock. Even so, the investigation didn't find any signs of wrongdoing. So it was decided that Richard's fall was an accident. Natalie took care of the old man who was sick and always did everything she was supposed to do with the best of her ability. The young woman didn't feel scared around the old man, like most nurses do. She always talked to him while she changed his sheets or checked his blood pressure. Natalie told Richard Young about herself, her grandma, and the farm where she had grown up. Of course, no one but Natalie and Francis thought that all the talking would lead to anything. They thought of Richard Young as a person, even though he could spend the rest of his life in a coma. This went on for about a month. Then the caretaker began to notice something was off. There were mostly small changes in how Richard Young's body was positioned. Natalie used to cover the old man with a blanket. Sometimes it would end up on the floor for no reason. The old businessman's body was moving around, as if someone were turning him over on purpose while Natalie was away. "What's going on? What's with the blanket on the ground?" Natalie thought. "The wind couldn't have blown it away." The young woman paid close attention to Richard Young's body and noticed all the small changes that happened. The old man still looked like he was in a coma. Natalie was very surprised by this. She even began to believe that he might not be in a coma at one point. What if he's not really in a coma? Why would he do it? Natalie made a wish. The more she thought about it, the more she believed Richard Young was lying to everyone, even her. The young woman finally got the nerve to talk to the liar one day. "Mr. Young, sir, I know you can hear me," she said. "For some reason, you keep acting like you're in a coma, even though it seems like you woke up a long time ago. You can trust me if you need help or have a secret." Natalie looked carefully into the old man's face after she was done talking. She was very upset when she learned he hadn't heard her. She was about to leave the room when she heard a person behind her say, "Wait, don't go. I have something to say. Since I don't have any other choice, I've been lying for a month now. My family and I are in danger." She turned around and was shocked to see the old man awake. She even began to wonder if the old man had gone crazy at this point. Richard Young wasn't crazy at all, and everything he told Natalie later made sense and was shocking. Yes, the young woman was a little annoyed that Francis lied to her and said he was poor when he wasn't, but she chose not to think about it too much after she found out why Francis was lying. Richard Young says the events in the mountain wasn't really a mistake. Someone had cut his rope, and 3 months before that, Andrew, his only son, had died in a car crash that seemed very strange and sketchy. "But who would want to kill you?" Natalie spoke up. "I think something is wrong, but I need proof. A long time ago, I made a will that says Francis would get everything I own if I die. Not a thing about it. Who is the one who has the most to lose? That's right. Amanda Young, my daughter-in-law," the old man said. Natalie didn't understand what a bad family she was in until that moment. Francis was busy trying to save the business from going under after his stepmother almost lost it. He was rarely at home during this time. Richard Young asked Natalie to keep a change in his state from everyone else. The young caretaker and the old man talked about everything during the day when they were by themselves. The patient kept acting like he was in a coma when night fell. This is something most of Richard's family thought he would do until the end of his days. Natalie knew sounds were coming from behind the old man's door because she got to the Young's house a little early one day. Amanda Young was one of the people talking, and Natalie didn't know the other person. "You have to be patient, he's going to die soon. And then I'll deal with the stepson, and we'll finally get to live our happily ever after," she said. "That is something you've said a lot. 3 months have passed since the old man fell asleep. Why is he still here?" the man spoke up. Not until then did Natalie understand that Richard Young was totally right, and his family and life were in danger. Amanda and her friend stopped talking as soon as the young woman walked into the room and pretended to put the blanket back in place over the man's feet. Natalie greeted her like nothing was wrong and then got to work. She now knew that the old businessman had to be watched at all times. Natalie called Francis while he was away on business and told him what she had heard. Natalie said, "I think you should call the police before things get worse." She was definitely right, especially since the man who came in with Amanda was probably her boyfriend. The police didn't have enough proof to start the case, which was a shame. Amanda Young seemed like a sad widow taking care of her adopted son and unconscious father-in-law, even though there was no proof. Francis gave it a lot of thought about what he could do, but his grandfather had a better idea. He was smart all his life. Richard Young asked his grandson to bring him a voice recorder so that the next time Amanda and her boyfriend came to see him, he could record them talking. It took 3 days for it to happen, but when Amanda did show up, Richard Young's recording was all the proof the cops needed, and he didn't even know it. Amanda lied about both herself and her boyfriend in court. This couple was the one that planned the accident for Richard's son, and then tried to kill Richard. Because of the tape the old man made, the pair was arrested the next day. Richard could finally stop going through life as if he was unconscious and get back to normal. Amanda was, of course, shocked to see that her husband's father was still living and well. Richard was very thankful that Natalie had taken the time to help him and had renewed his faith in people. Since the businessman knew that Natalie's grandmother was having trouble, he always asked about her health. The girl chose to show Richard Young the pictures of her grandma that she always had in her purse. The pictures showed Rosemary Hall as a child, when she was still thin and beautiful. Richard Young picked up the pictures and looked at them more closely. He then shook his head and changed. "What's wrong with you, Grandpa? How do you feel?" Frances screamed. No one could figure out why Richard's tears were falling. "Oh my God, that's my Rosemary. It seems like 40 or 45 years ago," the old man whispered, trying not to cry. After Richard Young cooled down and told the story of his past, everything became clear. Rosemary Hall and Richard Young had known each other since they were kids, and were even dating. They broke up, but not without the future millionaire's parents' help. They never saw each other again. There was still the big fine for Richard. A week later, when Rosemary was done with her post-op care, he went to see her. The old woman broke down in tears when she saw the man she used to love. At that very moment, Frances and Natalie left the room in silence. After talking for about an hour and a half, Richard and Rosemary called their grandkids into the room and told them that they were actually brother and sister. It turned out that Richard was the father of Rosemary's child. The old man never knew about her, which is a shame. Rosemary had been very careful to keep the secret all this time. Natalie and Frances broke down in tears as they looked at each other. Things turned out to be upside down when they found out that they were brother and sister. On the other hand, this wasn't wrong, because family ties are always better than any other kind of bond. Later, Richard and Rosemary moved in together. Their grandkids got used to their new life and chose not to blame anyone else for it. People over the city heard about this amazing story for a long time, which showed that life is full of surprises.